Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism basically is the idea that you reuse your own work, that you plagiarize from yourself. There are some people who don't believe that self-plagiarism is a real thing. So that's the first question. Is self-plagiarism real? Yes, self-plagiarism is real. Some people don't care that much about it, particularly, and in fact, self-plagiarism in some contexts is actually very hard to detect anyway. There are all kinds of stories of students, particularly undergraduate students in university or whatever it is, who make slight variations to the same paper and turn it in for multiple classes and do well in each of those classes. It's remarkably difficult to identify self-plagiarism in that way. Probably something like turnitin.com might help, but I think a lot of instructors, myself included, don't use that, so it's not necessarily something that we're likely to catch, which is not to say you should do it. You should not write new papers for each class, etc., etc. That's not an uncommon thing, though. This idea of self-plagiarism at this fairly innocuous low level. Self-plagiarism becomes more of a significant problem actually at a higher level when you're publishing things. So here's where we get into interesting things, because typically as the author of a published piece, for instance, of scholarship, the articles that I've written, the book that I've written and published, I maintain the copyright on those. Technically, that is my intellectual property. But because of the publishing contracts that I've signed with Routledge for my book, with a number of different presses, McFarland or University of Toronto Press or whatever it is, who publish the journals that I've published articles in, I can't actually reuse that material without their permission. So if I want, so for instance, I'm going to be writing, I'm going to be creating an edited collection of articles about a particular topic. I've published an article on this topic with McFarland, the press. If I include that article without McFarland's express permission, that is a form of self-plagiarism. If I get McFarland's permission, I can actually include it and there's no problem. But if I don't get their permission and it violates my publication contract, that's actually a legal issue. So, self-plagiarism is primarily a concern in contexts where we're dealing with publication, where we're dealing with words that, while you may still own the copyright to them, someone else has the publication rights, or in many cases, exclusive publication rights. So that's much more of an issue. That being said, self-plagiarism for many people is an ethical issue more necessarily than it is a legal issue, particularly in the context of universities, right? I had said earlier that a lot of times students will make slight revisions to a paper so that it will fit multiple assignments, and they'll turn it into different instructors. Sometimes this is explicitly prohibited by a university's code of conduct. That's not that uncommon, that a university's code of conduct, which often has specific guidelines for what does and does not count as plagiarism, fraud, cheating, etc., etc. Self-plagiarism will often be covered in those. So it's worth it for you as a student to actually know what your university's code of conduct prohibits. That being said, even if it is not explicitly prohibited by your university, it's still a violation of the implicit understanding of the academic relationship. And what I mean by that is, for the most part, when an instructor gives an assignment to students, the assumption, the presumption, is that students will write that paper for that class, that it is a single-use document. And that doesn't always happen. And I have had students who've said, I wrote a similar paper to this, can I make revisions to it and turn it in for this class? Frequently, I personally will say yes. I'm not that worried about that because I'm not necessarily that worried personally about self-plagiarism. But the assumption when an instructor assigns a project is that you will do that project specifically for that class, not that you will recycle material you've already created for a different context. Again, there's a decent chance you would not get caught, if I'm being honest, but does it help you? Does it help? I mean, and yeah, you could make an argument that like, oh, it's quicker and easier, and really all I want is the grade, but that's not what university is about. University is about learning and growing and developing and producing new material, producing new arguments, new claims, etc., is a much better way of developing in that sense than just recycling the same material. So there are legal issues to consider with self-plagiarism. There are also ethical issues to consider. Generally speaking, yes, self-plagiarism does exist, and it should be avoided.